Welcome, history fanatics, to Mrs. Heron's video playlist, where you will get the best of the best in social studies.
We are working on Unit 3, Africa. Our goal for this unit is to analyze the impact of geography on history, culture, population, government, and the economy of Africa. This unit is split up into 3 chapters. Chapter 6, West and Central Africa, Chapter 7, Southern and Eastern Africa, and Chapter 8, North Africa. We will begin in Chapter 6 with West and Central Africa, starting with Section 1, Chapter Atlas. Our goal today is to distinguish between the different climate zones of West and Central Africa. West and Central Africa have a gorgeous variety of landscapes and climates. Most people assume that Africa only looks like this: hot, dry, desert. But Africa also looks like this, and even this. Now, that isn't to say that Africa doesn't have some very hot areas, because it certainly does. One example is the Sahara Desert that runs from North Africa down into the western and central regions. This is the largest hot desert in the world. Antarctica is the largest desert, if you're wondering. Central Africa is mainly lush green grasslands. Most of the continent is on a large flat plateau with no major mountain ranges. However, the plateau is fairly short due to millions of years of erosion and weathering. This region of Africa has some of the largest basins in the world. A drainage basin basically allows excess water to flow across a large area of land into a river or a lake. Let's check out the Chad Basin here. It drains from Lake Chad in the Sahel, which is a semi-arid dry region between the Sahara Desert and the wetter southern regions of Africa. West of the Chad Basin is the Niger River Basin, which is the largest in West Africa. Finally, the Congo Basin and the Congo River drain most of the rainfall from Central Africa. This region of Africa receives heavy rainfall all year round, and the rivers that run through Central Africa are so large that huge ships are able to sail across them. The continent of Africa sits directly on the Earth's equator. In fact, the equator divides Africa almost exactly in half, which makes for a very interesting weather pattern in different regions of Africa. The central portion of Africa is a tropical wet climate because it is on the equator. This explains why Central Africa receives rain all year long. The equator is also the hottest position on Earth, therefore it is both constantly wet and hot, which equals, you guessed it, humidity. What ecosystem do you think would best survive in these conditions? The rainforest, right? Think of the animals and insects living in the rainforests of Africa. Monkeys and flying squirrels would live in the forest canopy, while elephants and gorillas would stomp across the forest floor. And just above and below the equator, the climate becomes drier, creating a savanna or a landscape of flat grassland with some trees and some plants that can withstand hot climates. Outside of the savanna is an arid zone. These areas are dry with extremely hot days and bitter cold nights. Not many animals can survive in these conditions outside of hyenas, gazelles, rats, and ostriches. The people of West and Central Africa have to make the best use of the land that they can. Less than 3% of the land in Chad is arable, making it useless for farming. Thus, the few people who live in Chad are typically nomadic and make their living raising camels or cattle. Half of the people in Chad live in the southern portion of the nation and make their living by growing cotton. In Nigeria, however, 33% of the land is arable, with cocoa serving as their primary crop. Oil is another major resource in these nations. The issue with oil is that it pollutes the environment and it leaks into the water sources over time. For example, 1.5 million tons of oil have leaked into the Niger Delta in the last 50 years alone. This region is rich with natural resources like oil, copper, diamonds, uranium, gold. Outside of oil spills, this region also experiences issues with people cutting down trees for firewood or to sell. This leaves the land vulnerable to the hot desert sun, which causes the land to dry up and no longer be useful for farming in a process called desertification. When large amounts of trees and forests are removed, it is called deforestation. Even in nations that receive plenty of rain and decent weather, deforestation can lead to desertification. The Ivory Coast is a clear example of this issue, where 90% of the nation's trees have been cut down by their timber industry over the past few decades. In the region, Nigeria has the best land for farming, and with 148 million people, it also has Africa's highest population. Countries that have dry, desert-like conditions have a much smaller population, such as Mauritania, that only has about 3.3 million people. And some of the issues with conflict and desertification have forced people to move into the cities, resulting in overcrowding and eventually food shortages. While these issues may seem harsh, the biggest threat to the people comes in the smallest of sizes: insects. That's right, insects such as the tsetse fly carry parasites and diseases that harm the people of West and Central Africa. The tsetse fly causes a fatal sickness known to the locals as the sleeping sickness, and it is deadly to humans and to cattle. But the deadliest insect of all is the mosquito. Mosquitoes can carry malaria, which is another deadly disease. 90% of people who get this disease live in the tropical areas of Africa because mosquitoes mainly live in hot and wet, humid environments. It is preventable with the use of mosquito nets, but unfortunately many West and Central African people cannot afford the simplest items like mosquito nets.